Chapter 6. The ride home was long and silent. None of us felt like talking, not even TJ. Big Ma had informed him shortly after leaving Strawberry that she did not want to hear another word out of him before we reached home. He sulked for a while with a few audible grumbles which no one paid any attention to, but finally he fell asleep and did not awaken until we had driven up the Granger road and stopped in front of the Avery house. By the time Jack pulled into our own yard, the night was a thick blackness and smelled of a coming rain. Big Ma climbed warily down from the wagon and went into the house without a word. I stayed with Stacy to help him put the wagon inside the barn and unhitch and feed Jack. While I held the flashlight on the barn doors, Stacy slowly slid aside the plank of wood that held the doors fastened. "Cassie," he said in a quiet, thoughtful voice, "don't go blaming Big Ma for what she done." "Why not?" I asked angrily. "She made me apologize to that old ugly Lillian Jean about something wasn't even my fault. She took them old Simmons' side without even hearing mine." "Well, maybe she couldn't help it, Cassie. Maybe she had to do it." "Had to do it!" I practically screamed. "She didn't have to do nothing. She's grown just like that Mr. Sims, and she should have stood up for me. I wouldn't have done her that way." Stacy put the plank on the ground and leaned against the barn. "There's things you don't understand, Cassie. And I suppose you do, huh? Ever since you went down into Louisiana to get Papa last summer, you think you know so doggone much. Well, I bet you I know one thing. If that hadn't been for Papa, he would have made me... If that had been Papa, he wouldn't have made me apologize. He would have listened to me." Stacy sighed and swung open the barn doors. "Well, Papa, that's different. But Big Ma ain't Papa, and you can't expect..." His voice trailed off as he peered into the barn. Suddenly he cried, "Cassie, give me that flashlight!" Then, before I could object, he tore the flashlight from my hand and shone it into the barn. "What's Mr. Granger's car doing in our barn?" I exclaimed as the silver Packard was unveiled by the light. Without answering me, Stacy swiftly turned and ran toward the house. I followed closely behind. Throwing open the door to Mama's room, we stood dumbfounded in the doorway. Instead of Mr. Granger, a tall, handsome man, nattily dressed in gray pinstriped suit and vest, stood by the fire with his arm around Big Ma. For a moment we swayed with excitement, then as if by signal we both cried, "Uncle Hammer!" and dashed into his arms. Uncle Hammer was 2 years older than Papa and unmarried. He came every winter to spend the Christmas season with us. Like Papa, he had dark, red-brown skin, a square-jawed face, and high cheekbones. Yet there was a great difference between them somehow. His eyes, which showed great warmth as he hugged and kissed us now, often had a cold, distant glaze, and there was an aloofness in him which the boys and I could never quite bridge. When he let go, Stacy and I both grew consciously shy, and we backed away. I sat down beside Christopher John and Little Man, who were silently gazing up at Uncle Hammer. But Stacy stammered, "What's Mr. Granger's car doing in our barn?" "That's your Uncle Hammer's car," Mama said. "Did you unhitch, Jack?" "Uncle Hammer's!" Stacy exclaimed, exchanging shocked glances with me. "No kidding!" Big Ma stammered, "Hammer, you went and got a car like Harlan Granger's?" Uncle Hammer smiled a strange, wry smile. "Well, not exactly like it, Mama. Mine's a few months newer. Last year when I come here, I was right impressed with that big old Packard of Mr. Harlan Fillmore Granger's, and I thought I'd like to own one myself. Seems that me and Harlan Granger just got the same taste." He winked slyly at Stacy. "Don't it, Stacy?" Stacy grinned. Maybe we'll all go riding in it one day, if it's all right with your Mama." "Oh, boy!" cried Little Man. "You mean it, Uncle Hammer?" I asked. "Mama, can we?" "We'll see," Mama said. "But in any case, not tonight. Stacy, go take care of Jack and draw up a bucket of water for the kitchen. We've done the other chores." Since no one told me to help Stacy, I forgot all about Jack and settled back and to listen to Uncle Hammer. Christopher John and Little Man, who Big Ma had feared would be moping because they'd not been allowed to go to town, seemed not at all concerned that Stacy and I had gone. They were awestruck by Uncle Hammer, and compared to his arrival, a day in Strawberry was a minor matter. For a while, Uncle Hammer talked only to Mama and Big Ma, laughing from deep down inside him like Papa. But then, to my surprise, he turned from them and addressed me. "I understand you had your first trip to Strawberry today, Cassie," he said. "What do you think?" Big Ma stiffened, but I was pleased to have this opportunity to air my side of the Strawberry Fair. "I didn't like it," I said. "Them old Simses—" "Mary, I feel a bit hungry," Big Ma interrupted abruptly. "Supper still warm?" "Yes, ma'am," Mama said, standing. "I'll set it on the table for you." As Mama stood up, I started again. "Them old Simses—" "Let Cassie get it, Mary," said Big Ma nervously. "You must be tired." I looked strangely at Big Ma, then up at Mama. "Oh, I don't mind," said Mama, heading for the kitchen. "Go ahead, Cassie, and tell your uncle about Strawberry." "That old Lillian Jean Sims made me so mad I could just spit. I admit that I bumped into her, but that was 'cause I was thinking about old Mr. Barnett waiting on everybody else in his old store before he waited on us." "Jim Lee Barnett?" asked Uncle Hammer, turning toward Big Ma. "That old devil still living?" Big Ma nodded mutely, and I went on. "But I told him he shouldn't have been round there waiting on everybody else before he got to us." "Cassie!" Big Ma exclaimed, hearing this bit of news for the first time. Uncle Hammer laughed. You told him that? Yes, sir, I said softly, wondering why he was laughing. Oh, that's great. Then what happened? Stacy made me leave, and Mr. Barnett told me I couldn't come back no more. Then I bumped into that confounded Lillian Jean, and she tried to make me get off the sidewalk, and then her daddy come along, and he... Big Ma's eyes grew large, and she whispered hoarsely, Cassie, I don't think... And he twisted my arm and knocked me off the sidewalk, I exclaimed, unwilling to muffle what Mr. Sims had done. I glanced triumphantly at Big Ma, but she wasn't looking at me. Her eyes, frightened and nervous, were on Uncle Hammer. I turned to look at him, too. His dark eyes had narrowed to thin, angry slits. He said, He knocked you off the sidewalk, Cassie? A grown man knocked you off the sidewalk? Yes, sir. This Lillian Jean Sims, her daddy wouldn't be Charlie Sims, would it? Yes, sir. Uncle Hammer grasped my shoulders. What else did he do to you? Nothing, I said, frightened by his eyes, except that he wanted me to apologize to Lillian Jean because I wouldn't get in the road when she told me to. And did you? Big Ma said I had to. Uncle Hammer released me, and I sat very still. No one said a word. Then he stood slowly, his eyes icing into the cold, distant way that they could, and he started toward the door, limping slightly on his left leg. Christopher John, Little Man, and I stared after him wonderingly, but Big Ma jumped up from her chair, knocking it over in her haste, and dashed after him. She grabbed his arm. Let it be, son, she cried. That child ain't hurt. Not hurt? You look into her eyes and tell me she ain't hurt. Mama came back from the kitchen with Stacy behind her. What is it? She asked, looking from Big Ma to Uncle Hammer. Charlie Sims knocked Cassie off the sidewalk in Strawberry, and the child just told Hammer, said Big Ma in one breath, still holding on to Uncle Hammer's arm. Oh, Lord, Mama groaned. Stacy, get Mr. Morrison, quick now. As Stacy sped from the room, Mama's eyes darted to the shotgun over the bed, and she edged between it and Uncle Hammer. Uncle Hammer was watching her, and he said quietly, Don't worry, I ain't got to use David's gun. I got my own. Suddenly, Mama lunged to the side door, blocking it with her slender body. Hammer, now you listen to me. But Uncle Hammer gently but firmly pushed her to one side, and brushing Big Ma from his arms, opened the door and bounded down the steps into the light rain. Little Man, Christopher John, and I dashed to the door as Big Ma and Mama ran after him. Get back inside, Mama called over her shoulder, but she was too busy trying to grab Uncle Hammer to see that we obeyed, and we did not move. Hammer, Cassie's all right, she cried. Don't go making unnecessary trouble. Unnecessary trouble? You think my brother died and I got my leg half blown off in their German war to have some redneck knock Cassie around any time it suits him? If I'd have knocked his girl down, you know what would have happened to me? Yeah, you know all right. Right now I'll be hanging from that yoke over yonder. Let go of me, Mary. Mama and Big Ma could not keep him from reaching the car, but just as the Packard roared to life, a huge figure loomed at the darkness and jumped into the other side, and the car zoomed angrily down the drive into the blackness of the Mississippi night. Where'd he go? I asked Mama as Mama slowly climbed the steps. Her face under the glow of the lamp was tired, drained. He went up to the Simses, didn't he? Didn't he, Mama? He's not going anywhere, Mama said, stepping aside and waiting until both Big Ma and Stacy were inside. Then she locked the door. Mr. Morrison will bring him back, said Christopher John confidently, although he looked somewhat bewildered by all that had happened. If he don't, said Little Man ominously, I bet you Uncle Hammer will teach that old Mr. Sims a thing or two, round here hitting on Cassie. I hope he knocks his block off, I said. Mama's gaze blazed upon us. I think little mouths that have so much to say must be very tired. No, Mama. No, ma'am, Mama. We ain't. Go to bed. Mama, it ain't but... Mama's face hardened, and I knew that it would not be in my best interest to argue further. I turned and did as I was told. Christopher John and Little Man did the same. When I got to my door, I asked, Ain't Stacy coming? Mama glanced at Stacy sitting by the fire. I don't recall his mouth working so hard, do you? No, I muttered, and went into my room. After a few minutes, Mama came in. Without a word of reprimand, she picked up my clothes from where I tossed them at the foot of the bed, and absently draping them over the back of a chair, she said, Stacy tells me you blame Big Ma for what happened today. Is that right? I thought over her question and answered, Not for all of it, just for making me apologize to that old dumb Lillian Jean Sims. She ought to have done that, Mama. Oughtn't have done that, Mama. Papa wouldn't have. I don't want to hear what Papa wouldn't have done, Mama snapped, or what Mr. Morrison wouldn't have done, or Uncle Hammer. You were with Big Ma, and she did what she had to do, and believe me, young lady, she didn't like doing it one bit more than you did. Well, I muttered, maybe so, but there's no maybe to it. Yes, I said softly, deciding that it was better to study the patchwork pattern on the quilt until the anger left Mama's eyes, and I could talk to her again. After a moment she sat beside me on the bed and raised my chin with the tip of her forefinger. Big Ma didn't want you to be hurt, she said. That was the only thing on her mind, making sure Mr. Sims didn't hurt you. Yes'm, I murmured, then flared. But, Mama, that Lillian Jean ain't got the brains of a flea. How come I gotta go around calling her Miz like she's grown or something? Mama's voice grew hard, because that's the way of things, Cassie. The way of what things? I asked wearily. Baby, you had to grow up a little today. I wish, well, no matter what I wish, it happened, and you have to accept the fact that in the world outside this house, things are not always as we would have them to be." "But, Mom, it ain't fair. I didn't do nothing to that confounded Lillian Jean. How come Mr. Sims went and pushed me like he did?" Mama's eyes looked deeply into mine, locked into them, and she said in a tight, clear voice, "Because he thinks Lillian Jean is better than you are, Cassie, and when you, that old scrawny, chicken-legged, snaggle-tooth cross, Cassie." Mama didn't raise her voice, but the quiet force of my name silenced me. "Now," she said, folding my hand in hers, "I didn't say that Lillian Jean is better than you. I said Mr. Sims only thinks she is. In fact, he thinks she's better than Stacy or Little Man or Christopher John. Just 'cause she's his daughter?" I asked, beginning to think Mr. Sims was a bit touched in the head. "No, baby, because she's white." Mama's hold tightened on mine, but I exclaimed, "Aw, shoot, white ain't nothing." Mama's grip didn't lessen. "It is something, Cassie. White is something just like black is something. Nobody born on this earth is something. Everybody born on this earth is something, and nobody, no matter what color, is better than anybody else. Then how come Mr. Sims don't know that? Because he's one of those people who has to believe that white people are better than black people to make himself feel big." I stared questioningly at Mama, not really understanding. Mama squeezed my hand and explained further. "You see, Cassie, many years ago, when our people were first brought from Africa and changed to work as slaves in the country, like Big Ma's Papa and Mama?" Mama nodded. "Yes, baby, like Papa Luke and Mama Rachel, except they were born right here in Mississippi, but their grandparents were born in Africa, and when they came there were some white people who thought it was wrong for any people to be slaves, so the people who needed slaves to work in their fields, and the people who were making money bringing slaves from Africa, preached that black people weren't really people like white people were, so slavery was all right. They also said that slavery was good for us because it taught us to be good Christians, like the white people." She sighed deeply, her voice fading into a distant whisper. "But they didn't teach us Christianity to save our souls, but to teach us obedience. They were afraid of slave revolts, and they wanted us to learn the Bible's teaching about slaves being loyal to their masters. But even teaching us Christianity didn't make us stop wanting to be free, and many slaves ran away." "Papa Luke ran away," I reminded her, thinking of the story of how Great-Grandpa had run away 3 times. He had been caught and punished for his disobedience, but his owners had not tried to break him, for he had had a knowledge of herbs and cures. He had tended both the slaves and the animals of the plantation, and it was from him that Big Ma had learned medicines. Mama nodded again. "That's right, honey. He was hiding in a cave when freedom came, so I understand." She was silent a moment, then went on. "Well, after a while, slavery became so profitable to people who had slaves, and even to those who didn't, that most folks decided to believe that black people really weren't people like everybody else. And when the Civil War was fought, and Mama Rachel and Papa Luke and all other slaves were freed, people continued to think that way. Even the Northerners who fought the war didn't really see us as equal to white people. So now, even though 70 years have passed since slavery, most white people still think of us as they did then, that we're not as good as they are. And people like Mr. Sims hold on to that belief harder than some other folks because they have little else to hold on to. For him to believe that he is better than we are makes him think that he's important, simply because he's white." Mama's relaxed her grip. I knew that she was waiting for me to speak. There was a sinking feeling in my stomach, and I felt as if the world had turned itself upside down with me in it. Then I thought of Lillian Jean, and a surging anger gurgled upward, and I retaliated. "Well, they ain't!" I leaned closer to Mama, anxiously hoping that she would agree with me. "Of course they aren't," Mama said. "White people may demand our respect, but what we give them is not respect but fear. What we give to our own people is far more important because it's given freely. Now you may have to call Lillian Jean Miss, because the white people say so, but you'll also call our own young ladies at church Miss, because you really do respect them. Maybe we have no choice of what color we're born, or who our parents are, or whether we're rich or poor. What we do have is some choice over what we make our lives once we're here." Mama cupped my face in her hands. "And I pray to God you'll make the best of yours." She hugged me warmly, then motioned me under the covers. As she turned the lamp down low, I asked, "Mama, Uncle Hammer, if Mr. Morrison can't stop him, what'll happen?" "Mr. Morrison will bring him back." "But just what if he can't, and Uncle Hammer gets to Mr. Sims?" A shadowy fear fleeted across her face, but disappeared with the dimming light. I think you've done enough growing up for one day, Cassie," she said without answering my question. "Uncle Hammer will be all right. Now go to sleep."